Hello and welcome to your IELTS guide. This is a guided e-learning video series about the IELTS test that will give you practical tips in order to succeed in the exam. My name is Rebecca. This is my co-host Paddy.
So there are definitely some difficulties that students face in the listening test. One of the biggest ones is just getting lost. It's very easy, and I think all of us have done this listening to podcasts and things like that. You have a podcast on, you'll be doing some cooking, and you'll suddenly realize, I have not been paying attention to the last 5 minutes, and both of the speakers are now on a topic, and I've no idea how they got there, and I've got no clue because there's no context. They're referencing things that I've no idea what they're referencing. It's very difficult to pay attention for 30 minutes. And I think this is something that first-time IELTS test takers really struggle with, because there's not many situations in your life where you have to pay attention for 30 minutes and be constantly making notes and answering questions. So I think this is something that you really need to practice. There's no other solution than practice, because it's a very specific skill. The ability to make a note of correct answers without losing track. One of the key ways to do this is, first of all, to make sure you're prepared for each question. You don't have much time to read the questions in the listening test. So let's take section 3 as an example. When section 2 ends, there will be about 30 seconds to check your answers. Some students like to use that time to check their answers, like the narrator says. Other students, and I often think this is a better idea, use that time to jump ahead, look at section 3, read the questions. At the start of section 3, you will also get about 25, 30 seconds to view the questions. So you've got potentially 40, 50 seconds to read those questions. Do you have time to read those questions in detail and understand every single option in the multiple choice, to understand every single word in the sentence completion? Probably not. So you should be looking for keywords. A good example is a gap fill question. So you might have to write some notes in section 3. You might have to complete it with words from what the speakers say. The key thing to focus on is the words around the gap, because those are going to give you an idea of what type of word to expect. And then in the rest of the sentence, look for keywords in that sentence that will give you an indication of what the topic is and when the speaker has moved on to that topic. If one of the sentences says something like, Michelle thinks the research should be conducted in, well, you're going to expect something like a location or perhaps a time. So you know that when they start talking about location, place, time, month, week, year, that's when your brain should be, okay, now I need to listen to this. As I say, it's very difficult to pay attention for that period of time. So picking out keywords so you know when they've moved on to that section.
Absolutely. I think what you said, looking very carefully around the gap, is crucial, because sometimes for the sake of selecting the right answer, you just forget to look properly. So I've seen cases where candidates have repeated the preposition. Yeah. They heard on Monday and they literally wrote on Monday, but on was already in there. And that's just tragic, isn't it?
Definitely. That is a perfect example of a student not looking at the rest of the question information. And similarly, sometimes you get students writing an answer which is a word that's already mentioned in the question, which is guaranteed to not be correct. If it's in the question, it's not going to be the correct answer. So yeah, using that time to identify the kind of word you should be listening for is really important. Another one is more related to listening strategy and understanding how speakers structure their conversations and speech, and that's discourse markers. So when you and me are talking now, we're not just producing independent sentences with no context. We follow each other and we lead on and we say, okay, let's move on to the next topic. Actually, in relation to what you were saying earlier, having said that, I do think we use this language to structure our speech and to connect ideas in a way that's supposed to make it easy for someone to follow. The purpose of language, the purpose of speech is to get my meaning across. So speakers will use things like discourse markers. I think this is particularly important in part 4. Part 4 is very challenging because you have no break. You have potentially 7 minutes of recorded audio of someone talking about a project to encourage the growth of coral in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And it might not be a topic that you're familiar with. And in the notes that you have to complete, there'll be different sections. There might be a section on funding for the research and problems encountered by the scientists and the use of technology, different areas. And so you need to pay attention to when the speaker is moving on to that topic. Understanding how we use discourse markers is a really important skill. One way to practice this is to sort of practice writing your own speech and think about how you would structure it and how you would say, okay, let's look at this. Now we're going to move on to this. Having said that, so all of these kind of discourse markers are an indication of how we move from topic to topic. And one more thing that causes difficulty for students is, just like we spoke about in our episode on reading, is distractors. So distractors are information which has been included in the question and sometimes in the audio, which makes you think it's the correct answer, but it is not. Distractors are one of your biggest enemies in the listening test. Let's take an example from part 1. You have a question that is the date of the first class, and then a blank space. Date of the first class. Okay, so the answer could be 16th of August or 29th of September, something like that. It is almost guaranteed that they will give you more than one date in the recorded audio. If they didn't, then the answer would be very easy to get. You just write what you hear. They don't want you to just write what you hear. They want you to comprehend what you hear and write only the relevant information. So you should expect distractors. Mm-hmm. And that's really the solution. It doesn't sound like a solution, but the solution is expecting them. So if you see a question which asks you for a date, don't just write down the first thing you hear. Don't just write down the last thing you hear. It's going to be one of those. You need to listen to the whole thing and think about, okay, did they start with this date? Did they change their mind? Did they say it's on this date, although if it's August, then it's actually on Tuesday, so the date changes? There'll often be some sort of trickery or some sort of way of indicating that it's one option but not the other option.
I think the secret to good IELTS listening is to basically never relax during the recording. It's not a long space of time in your life anyway, but you can't afford to have this feeling of relief when you get one answer right. You just say, oh, I got it. So for 10 seconds, I will just switch off and reward myself for listening so carefully and getting the answer right. Well, no, because the next bit of information might actually contradict what you just deemed the right answer. So you need to change it. And it's just this, we've spoken about it already, this extreme focus on the entire recording for its duration. You can't afford to relax at any given time.
It's super intense, definitely. I mean, the answers that appear in the audio, there will generally be spacing between them. It is practically impossible that you get two answers next to each other. So you get the answer to question 26 is this, and then 5 seconds later, they say the answer to question 27. They're not evil. They're not trying to destroy your life. So you're not going to get something like that. You can usually expect a gap of, it could be 20 seconds, 30 seconds, could be like about 60 words or so. So yeah, they're not trying to make your life too difficult. But I agree with what you said. You really can't afford to relax. 30 minutes is not a long time, but it's mentally exhausting, and it takes practice. The more you do it, the more you'll be familiar with this kind of hyper focus on key information, definitely. Like reading, it is ultimately a test of your ability to comprehend English, not in written form, but in audio form, and therefore it is also a test of vocabulary. So how do students deal with that?
Well, first of all, in the same way as with reading, you need to show the ability to use synonyms, because oftentimes if the recording says, oh, you can purchase tickets at the front desk, and then in the question you have a word like buy, and you're supposed to know that these are synonyms. it doesn't work as simple as, having purchased both in the recording and in the question, because it's just too easy. And then interestingly, you need to demonstrate, whether you're taking the academic training module or the academic one, you need to demonstrate the ability to understand both everyday vocabulary and some academic vocabulary. So there isn't this, I suppose, you're not spared this in the general training, because in part one, you will definitely have everyday vocabulary, phrases like booking a room, making an appointment. In part two, descriptions of places or events, collocations like campus tours, public talks. In part three, student discussions or talks about assignments, so this educational field. And in part four, this is a proper lecture that you'll be listening to. So you need to be aware of the subject-specific terms that will come your way.
I think that's really important because it helps student prepare. So like you say, there are certain kinds of phrases and language you can expect in part 1, 2, and 3. Part 4 is probably a lot more open to different topics, whereas part 3, if you get familiar with language related to deadlines, handing things in, submitting things, planning, booking, all of that. In part 1, also language related to booking, dates, personal details, personal information. You can expect all of that.
Exactly. And then we have to talk again about the ability to spell. And this is even more important than listening, because you don't see the words, you just listen to them. And this is a key difference. Finally, I think you've mentioned this, but there are quite a lot of numbers and dates in the recording. So you need to get used to hearing 13 versus 30 times, like 5:45, dates, the 15th of July, and so forth, and just be able to recognize these and work with them.
Would you say English is the most difficult language to spell?
Oh, absolutely not. I'm pretty sure of it, actually. It's one of the easiest language to spell, but there are some anomalies. I mean, I'm just saying this as a speaker and writer of other languages. There are some anomalies. A word like subpoena, for instance, is spelled in a completely unexpected way. You don't see that coming. When you see it written down, you're taken aback.
Fortunately, they're never going to test you on subpoena in the IELTS test, guaranteed.
That's true. But then the rules help a lot, and I would say the exceptions in general are far fewer than in other languages.
Yeah, I think English has such a mixed history of where we took these languages from, or where we took these words from. It's Old English and Germanic words, which have changed through French, through sort of a mixture of spread around the world, and also just the history of printing and the dictionary has just changed how we spell things. I think there are rules, but those rules are broken almost more often than they're made. So it's challenging for students, but it's important to recognize that yes, the listening test will test your ability to understand how English words are spelled, but they're not going to give you the craziest, most difficult words. There are, I'm not going to say a list, but there's a range of vocabulary they're going to test you on. But words that are, put it this way, words that native speakers can never spell correctly, they're probably not going to test you on that. I would maybe make some exceptions. Accommodation is a hard one. I get that wrong all the time, and that might come up in the listening test. But yeah, words like, I don't know, even choir is quite difficult to spell, isn't it?
That's true.
But yeah, it's good to get familiar with certain words that would come up in part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. Yeah.
Agreed. And this leads us to the next question. Well, how can you improve your vocabulary for listening? And I'm going to talk about a rather controversial idea, because some experts say you should never learn lists of words or phrases. It's random. It's not effective. And in terms of listening, I don't agree with that. I think you should build this high-frequency listening vocabulary bank that you need, because it's purposeful. It's not a random thing to do. So focus on words that you often hear in the sections. For instance, part 1, reservation, appointment, booking. Part 2, all these prepositional phrases that are so tricky, especially if you're also looking at a diagram or a map, next to, opposite, near, at the back, if you don't know them, you might already be a little confused by what you're looking at, and then you'll be double confused because of not knowing the words and phrases you hear. Part 3, some educational vocabulary like methodology, deadline, supervisor, assignment. And then for part 4, I think you'll hear the words factors, causes, significance, implications quite a lot. So you need to know them.
I guess the reason why a lot of teachers, including myself, really warn students against using lists is because students often try to memorize them decontextualized.
Yes.
And as you say, these words have immense value and importance in the context of those sections. So absolutely, learn these lists, but practice using them in context. You learn those prepositions for part 2, giving directions, but you learn them by using them, write sentences with them, definitely. Staring at a list every day is not going to help anybody.
No, it's the same as trying to read a dictionary. It doesn't really work.
Exactly.
I mean, it's interesting as an experiment, but not really effective.
You might win a Scrabble competition, but you're not going to be an English speaker, yeah.
Nice. And then the second suggestion I have here is to use a streaming platform like Netflix and choose shows with very clear pronunciation of English. So it could be documentaries like Our Planet, it could be soap operas, or even, shows like Bridgerton that are so popular. They have this very, very clear English and very sophisticated use of words. And that helps you because you can use English subtitles to connect sound to spelling. And also because you're enjoying the show, this seems effortless. You're actually, you like the experience, so it doesn't feel like work.
Do you have to watch shows that have posh English people talking?
That's a very good question. No, of course you don't. I would prioritize anything that has clear English language. So I think a movie like, is it Trainspotting?
Interesting choice.
I'm not sure if that's a good listening practice
sure.
because almost everyone struggles to understand as a non-native, to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, and Scottish accents come up in the test. That movie might not be everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, absolutely.
The idea is, of course, there should be, because I'll get into this a bit later, there should be regional accents as well. You need exposure to that. But it should be someone who's actually trying to make themselves clear when they speak. Because if they don't, if the whole point of a show or a movie is to confuse people or to speak in a way that is not really understandable, because again, that's part of the story, then it might not be good practice.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's like what we said about reading. If you're enjoying it, then you're engaging with the content and you're engaging your brain and it's active listening.
Yes. So then what would be the best way to practice and improve your listening?
I think this idea of active listening involves not just playing something through headphones or listening to it on the TV. You have to be engaging with the content that you're actually listening to. So one of the things I recommend, and I recommend the same thing for listening, is again, extracting keywords from what you've listened to, and then try and write a summary of what you've just heard. This is a great thing to do with podcasts. Let's say you're listening to a 30-minute podcast. Could be a comedy podcast, a history podcast, self-improvement, business, whatever topic you're interested in. Sport. Stop the podcast every 5 to 10 minutes and write a summary of what the different speakers have said. If there are 2 speakers, figure out what their names are, or just say speaker 1, speaker 2, and write a summary of what each one is saying. Do they agree? Do they disagree? This is really important for section 3 of the listening test. So again, you're extracting keywords from what they said. How do you get those keywords? Well, make a note of them while you're listening. That's a really, really useful skill to do. It shows that you're engaging with the topics as they move between them, which is something you're going to have to do in the listening test. And then you've got a list of those keywords and you can use them to write a summary. So honestly, that's one of the best things that you can do. Write a summary of what you've heard. With movies, it's a little bit more difficult. And generally people don't want to keep a notebook when you're watching it on the sofa with your partner. You're watching a nice, you're enjoying Trainspotting together on a nice romantic Sunday evening. But yeah, I think that's why podcasts are particularly useful. But also, so many people watch content on YouTube. and on like TED Talks, for example. And those have the added benefit of having subtitles very, very visible. So you can use those subtitles to make note of stuff. But it's also important to switch off those subtitles every now and then, because you're not going to have those subtitles in the IELTS test.
Exactly. It just depends on what you're trying to practice, spelling or listening.
Absolutely. It's also quite good for content which is very structured. I say a TED Talk or maybe a podcast on a historical topic, is you can kind of set yourself some questions to answer as you listen, kind of like an IELTS test. So if you're listening to a discussion podcast, maybe you like politics, maybe it's a political podcast, you can say speaker 1, speaker 2, speaker 3, and say, what is their view and how do they justify their position? You've already asked yourself 2 questions, and now you have to listen and answer those 2 questions. You've just set yourself a task, but you've set yourself a task on a topic or a piece of audio that you yourself are interested in. So again, this is targeted, focused listening.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, my top tips would be about, again, getting this exposure to different accents, because you will come across an Australian accent, for instance, a British one, an American one. There's so much out there that you can use, right? YouTube being a very useful resource. Then I think you mentioned this in a previous episode, just looking very carefully at the instructions. There's a reason why something is in bold and capitals, just because you need to pay attention to it, and it might make the difference between a lost mark and a mark that you get for a correct answer. Also try to predict answers. We spoke about looking around the gaps. Well, that can help you a great deal, because in your mind, especially if you've practiced your English for a while, you'll know, oh, I need a day here, I need a time, I need a place, because that's what logically follows.
Or a noun or a verb or an adjective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the more language awareness you have, the more precise you will be. Oh, I need this kind of adjective here for sure. It will be a positive adjective. And you might be right. And this shows the results of intense practice. You should also try and look at 2 questions at once, so you don't lose track of where you are. Don't write the final answer too quickly. We spoke about this, that speakers might change their mind, or the answer can be different in a matter of seconds, so you need to spot that. Don't leave the writing of the answers for the end of the test, because you'd be relying on memory, and there's just so much information coming your way. You can't do that. You can't trust yourself like that. I wouldn't trust myself like that to remember every answer.
I think that's, sorry to interrupt, that's really important, because especially in the paper-based test, students are told you will have some time at the end of the test to transfer your answers from the question paper to the answer paper. That is not the time to choose your answers. You should already have your answers by that point. You can use the question paper to write your answers as you go. But yeah, in the computer test as well, yes, you get 2 minutes at the end, but if you haven't already selected or written your answers, you're going to be guessing at that point, and the chances of you getting it correct is not 0, but it's low.
Exactly. And then we keep saying this, don't leave any blank answers. Just guess. If you're not sure, you might be right. And also, if you do leave a blank answer in the paper test, then you might just transfer answers incorrectly because of that blank answer, and it can be a disaster.
When I worked in Brighton many years ago, I had a student who left a gap for the second question. And in the mock test, I gave them 1 out of 40, just to prove the point of like, you messed this up. And in the real test, you would get 1 out of 40 because all of your answers shifted up. But also, yeah, it's crazy to leave a blank answer, because a blank answer is a guaranteed 0. Whereas if you put something, even if it's just the word banana, then that's more than 0% chance of getting it correct.
Exactly.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you for watching your IELTS guide. In the next episode, we're going to discuss speaking. Remember that you can do more IELTS practice and see more classes on IELTS Ready Premium. Until then, good luck with your studies.